From the New York Times, I'm Sabrina Tavernisi, and this is The Daily. Yesterday, we explained how control of the House has come down to a few races in 2 blue states. Today, my colleague, veteran congressional reporter Carl Hulse, on the Senate, where control could be decided by a single state, Montana. It's Wednesday, October 16th. Carl, nice to see you.
Good to be seen.
So, Carl, you've been reporting on the Senate and who will control the Senate after this very important election. And Democrats, of course, now control it. You're going to tell me by how much they control it?
They control it 51-49, and that is a very close margin.
Okay, extremely close. So won't take much to knock them off of that. Give us a lay of the land in terms of these races.
This is a very tough map for Democrats, one of the toughest they've had in a while. 2 seats would knock them out. One of those seats is already lost, West Virginia, where Joe Manchin decided not to run again, and they've pretty much already surrendered to the Republicans. At the start of the cycle, they were looking at really difficult races and were worried about Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, and Ohio. But at the moment, the Democratic incumbents are running ahead of the Republicans in all those races. And so that has come to put the focus on Montana.
So both parties are focused on Montana. Why Montana in particular?
Yeah, it's not a state that often figures into the national political debate. But this is probably the tipping point race that's going to decide control of the Senate. So you have Jon Tester, who is a dirt farmer in Montana, as he would describe himself. He runs for re-election as someone who can still be a Democrat and win in a rural state where Donald Trump is going to win easily. And Republicans have handpicked a challenger to Mr. Tester, a guy named Tim Sheehy, a veteran and a businessman. And everyone sees this as the race that is going to decide control of the Senate.
Got it. Okay, so incredibly important race. Tell me about Tester. I mean, I know he's a moderate Democrat, but that's kind of where my knowledge stops. Tell me about him.
He was elected in 2006, upset a Republican incumbent, but Democrats used to be able to do that in states like Montana, and he is running for his 4th term. He's a big guy, still a farmer himself. He famously lost, I believe it's 3 fingers in a meat grinder accident.
Oof.
But that's part of his authenticity. He celebrates that as proof that he's the genuine article as a farmer. He is somebody who tries to speak for rural America in the Senate, and he tends to push back against the Democratic Party. He has not endorsed Vice President Harris in the presidential race. He's trying to keep that race out there localized rather than nationalized. Very difficult to do. And on some issues, he has voted with Republicans, and I'm thinking right now of ag policy, water use, and how water is regulated. And he has joined with Republicans on that kind of issue. So he has differentiated himself, but it is hard when you're in the Senate, especially a narrowly divided Senate where you have to help your party. So he votes with the Democrats on a lot of the big issues.
Right.
But in Montana, he has remained popular. You know, he is seen as one of them, and that's the image he tries to cultivate. He likes to see himself as authentic Montanan and different from the Democrats in Washington.
And why is Tester so at risk?
Well, Montana is changing.
The state of Montana grew by more than 6% since 2010. The population now at 1,050,000 people.
Montana has been a magnet for people looking to relocate in the West.
Yellowstone County holds a solid #1 spot at 158,000.
And what has happened is that affluent people have moved into Montana, bought up huge chunks of property, and it's driven up the cost of housing considerably.
You know, you think the hot housing market, you think, I don't know, Silicon Valley, where the homes are way overpriced anyway. in California, but you don't think Billings, Montana, do you?
$700,000-800,000 for a house is probably not out of consideration, and a lot of people pay millions and millions.
You got to ask yourself, what is it about Billings that gets top billing?
And it's made it really hard for normal people. Montana has faced this new crisis of housing affordability. Taxes have become very expensive to live there for everyday people. And I'm sure people have seen Yellowstone, the Kevin Costner's drama that's on TV.
Is this your land? Incredible. I didn't catch your name.
That's because I didn't offer it.
You know, this is the fight of Yellowstone.
Repeat what I say. I'm going back to California.
I'm going back to California.
Montana doesn't want you.
Montana doesn't want me. I'm never coming back. I swear.
Okay, so who's moving in?
You have people who've moved there for all sorts of reasons. So you have people who, during the COVID period, may have moved to Montana to have the wide open spaces, and they're sticking around, right? You have affluent, techie-type people who have the money to come in and buy, a 10,000-acre ranch and set up shop there. And you have people who are looking for a place where they can be amongst like-minded people, very conservative people. Maybe moving from a place like, say, Colorado. They're in a mountain state, but Colorado is a state that's gone Democratic. They want to get back to a state that is more Republican. So lots of different reasons for people moving in, but they are more Republican than Democratic.
And it's interesting because this is in some ways flipping the script, right? Usually it's kind of coastal elites who are Democrats moving into conservative places and making it less conservative, but this is the opposite.
Yeah, in some ways, Montana is just the flip side of a lot of these arguments that would be made elsewhere.
So all of these people moving in, the population is booming in Montana for all sorts of different reasons, and that is changing the political makeup of the state.
Right. The map is changing. The demographics are changing. And Tim Sheehy, the Republican running against Jon Tester, is part of that change. He is a Minnesota native, a Navy SEAL, a combat veteran. He moved to the state to start a business. He's bought a ranch. He's raising his family, homeschooling his 4 children there, I believe. And he has a business that is important in the West. He's got an aerial firefighting business to help put out wildland fires.
Interesting.
So he is part of the influx, and Republicans saw him as the ideal opponent for Jon Tester, went out and recruited him. They've known all along this could be the make it or break it race for the Senate majority, and went and found a guy that they thought would be a great contrast with Tester.
Got it. Okay, so Republicans find this guy, Navy SEAL, good candidate in their view. How is Tester fighting Sheehy? Is he using Sheehy's outsider status against him?
We've had a lot of folks move into this state, a lot of folks with thick wallets, a lot of folks that drive up the cost of housing.
Yes, this is sort of the foundational aspect of Tester's race against Sheehy. He is trying to paint Tim Sheehy as the very person that many Montanans are worried about taking over their state.
And I would just tell you, on the housing front, Tim Sheehy is not the solution. He's part of the problem.
Here's a rich guy, moves in, buys up some property, and is taking over. And so Tester has pointed to Sheehy as the archetype of what's going on in Montana, and he thinks that there's enough Montanans who aren't going to like that, who are going to back him.
And quite frankly, I've got a lot of equipment that I've owned longer than he's been in the state of Montana. And to be able to have those values, those Montana values, and know what Montana needs and know what Montana makes Montana tick is going to be critically important moving forward for the greatest.
It's not quite keep Montana for Montanans, but it's been really the theme throughout Tester's campaign.
So what does Sheehy say in response? How does he fight back against what Tester's bringing here?
Truth is, I wasn't lucky enough to be born in Montana. I sure would have loved to have been. Couldn't control where my mother's room was when I crawled out of it. I couldn't.
One, he said in their second debate, he said, well, I didn't have any control over where my mother's womb was when I came out of it, and that I wish I had been born in Montana, but I wasn't.
Creating jobs in this state was an honor for me to do, and creating affordable housing, literally building affordable housing from scratch so our employees could afford to live in our state, was a priority for me and my company, and we've done that.
But also that he's bringing business and jobs to Montana. I would say that's his main response.
Well, you heard it again. If you come here from out of state, you're part of the problem. If you're not from here, John Tester doesn't think your voice matters, apparently.
And that, new people, new arrivals should be celebrated. You shouldn't have this bias against them, and that Tester's been there too long and is just too democratic, and Montana's a different place now, and so's the country, and that he thinks he would be a better representative for the state.
So, Carl, how's it looking in this race? Like, where are they in terms of the polls?
Well, I will say this, that John Tester is working really hard, but it's not looking good for John Tester. The polls have him down over 7 points, and that's going to be difficult for him to make up. Now, Tester is somebody who says he can close late and that he's got the great ground game and people are going to be surprised, and maybe they will be, and maybe Tester can win. But John Tester is sort of the last Democratic man standing in this part of America, a part of the country, the Great Plains, where Democrats used to do pretty well, but now are almost non-existent. And I think that this race is emblematic of how things have changed for Democrats in this part of the country.
We'll be right back. So, Carl, you said that Tester was really the last man standing for Democrats in this very crucial part of the country. How has Democratic support eroded there, and why?
Well, Democrats really used to win in this part of the country. As recently as 10 years ago, Montana was represented by 2 Democrats. But I think, to me, it's most remarkable when I look at the Senate map and think that states like North Dakota and South Dakota 20 years ago were represented almost in all federal offices by Democrats. Nebraska had Democratic senators. Now, those are all gone. Those seats are held by Republicans.
And what happened? Why did it change like that?
These are farmers. These are people in small towns. These are people who used to be able to set aside their partisan leanings at home, where they were probably Republicans. These are conservative voters in these states, but they trusted these Democrats that they sent to Washington to handle things for them.
And why did they trust Democrats before?
These Democrats that came from this region were pretty centrist and sort of common sense, and that's how the voters saw them. Actually, in North Dakota, being the state tax commissioner, I know that's a little bit obscure, but that became a stepping stone to federal office. So,
in other words, a pretty kind of nonpartisan state office, right?
Right. And then, people saw how they conducted themselves. These Democrats all were able to gain seniority, so they had important positions where they really could influence policy and try and take care of their constituents back home. But I think there's been a steady erosion of trust in some ways between the people who live in these states and the federal government. Those voters also saw the Democratic Party focus heavily on social issues where they really did not have much in common with the Democrats. And I think that they feel that they've just been left out of the Democratic debate, and they have turned to Republicans almost uniformly.
But Carl, you were also, of course, talking about people moving into the state who also had a different political orientation. So is the change here in Montana more about people moving in or more about the people who were there already changing their minds?
I think it's a little bit of both. I do think it's part of the influx of people, but it's also part of the nationalization of politics. It used to be all politics is local. Now all politics is national. So I think there are people in Montana who have voted repeatedly for John Tester and now are like, you know what? I'm going to go with the Republican Party.
So this is essentially the story that has been happening all over the country for a while now, right? Like blue states have gotten bluer, red states have gotten redder, and that dynamic is now coming for one of the few remaining places that would still elect a moderate from the other party, Montana.
Right. I do think this is all about the decline of ticket splitting. There used to be a voter who would very easily go into the polling place and vote for a Republican or a Democrat for president and then vote the other way for the senator or the House member. That just does not happen anymore. People are in their silos. And so for someone like Jon Tester to overcome this huge popularity of Trump in Montana is going to be very difficult. They're going to have to get a lot of people who vote for Trump to vote for him. Now, they are talking about that on the ground out there. They're like, you can be for Trump, but you also can be for Jon Tester, that you should be able to balance those two things. The problem for Tester is that people don't want to balance that anymore. They want their party to be in control, and it makes it really hard for Tester.
So people don't want to balance that anymore, which translates into Democrats probably not being able to win Montana anymore. At least that's what it looks like at this point. Yet it sounds like the Democrats aren't giving up on this race. Why is that?
Yeah, I think the Democrats are not going to give up. They have said that Tester will have all the resources he needs right to the end. Now, there are a couple of things potentially working in Tester's favor. There is a referendum on abortion rights on the ballot in Montana. Tester has really emphasized his support of abortion rights and tried to hit Sheehy there. There is a significant and very important Native American voting bloc in Montana. Tester has really courted them, and Sheehy was caught on a recording saying some disparaging comments about Native Americans, so that could help Tester. And, in our own poll at the Times, there remained a lot of independent voters and undecided voters who could tip this race. And, maybe this is one of the last places where people are going to be able to go, hey, you know what, I'm going to vote for Trump. Jon Tester's been around for a while. I like what Jon Tester does. He's a farmer, and I'm going to vote for him. And that's certainly what Tester's counting on. Sheehy is counting on that not happening.
So where does this leave us, Carl? And what does it mean about the math of the Senate for Democrats? If they're losing in the Plain states now for good, do they have any path to control in the Senate at all? I mean, is the Senate just lost to them?
So the Senate map has changed. If you can't win in the Plains, you have a structural problem. However, the Democrats are now winning in some places where they had their own problems in the past. I think of Colorado, 2 Democratic senators now. 20 years ago, 2 Republican senators. Arizona, possibly after Election Day, 2 Democratic senators. Nevada, a state where Democrats thought they were going to have a big problem this year, seems to be pretty good for the reelection of the Democratic incumbent. So Democrats are offsetting these losses elsewhere. And then you have Texas, which is the holy grail of Democrats. And every election cycle,
Right.
Democrats say, we're going to turn Texas blue.
And somehow it never seems to happen.
Yeah, but this time, Ted Cruz is in trouble in Texas against Colin Allred, who's run a good campaign against him. So Ted Cruz has a problem. Democrats are also looking at Florida. There's an abortion referendum on the ballot in Florida as well. Of course, the storms are going to impact the voting there. So Democrats are trying to pick off that seat. So while Montana is the hot spot, there are other places that are in play here.
So the map is just kind of flipping upside down, really. And in the balance is control of the Senate.
Yes, which is a really, really big deal. We could have this situation where, say, that Kamala Harris is elected president and Republicans win the Senate. Well, that hasn't happened in over 100 years, that exact lineup. Or if Trump wins, Republican Senate, maybe a Democratic House. So think about the Senate for whoever is elected president, right? The Senate, you have to get your cabinet through there. You have to get all your judicial nominees through there. You have to get your policy through there. So it's just going to be really difficult for whoever is elected president to get something done.
So, Carl, what does it say to you that this deep partisanship we've been talking about and seeing for years has reached Montana? What does it say about our politics?
It's interesting. People are just in their silos. Now they're Republican or Democrat. People are making their decisions based on national issues rather than the sort of issues that maybe in Montana would have differentiated Jon Tester from national Democrats. So I think partisanship has taken over. And you have the new Republicans there, but also the existing Republicans, people who've lived there for a long time. And I'm not sure they're ready to look at that guy they voted for so many times and vote for him again. And I think it really makes it difficult for someone like Tester, despite his historic appeal, to continue to be successful.
Carl, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Here's what else you should know today. On Tuesday, top security officials in the United States warned Israel that it has to let more humanitarian supplies into Gaza or face consequences. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Israel must comply within 30 days or risk losing military aid. The State Department said the amount of humanitarian support flowing into Gaza last month was at its lowest point since the October 7th attack. American law bars military support going to any country found to be blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid provided by the U.S. And a county judge in Georgia blocked a new rule mandating a hand count of election ballots across the state. Enacting such a sweeping change for the November election, he said, was, quote, too much, too late. The judge did not, however, knock down the rule entirely. His decision was confined to the current election, halting the rule from taking effect for 2024, while he further weighs its merits. The judge's ruling was a loss for right-wing activists who have pushed the passage of many new election provisions that the state has approved since summer. Today's episode was produced by Nina Feldman, Mary Wilson, Mooj Zadie, and Shannon Lin. It was edited by Patricia Willens and Brendan Klinkenberg, with help from Paige Cowett. Contains original music by Marian Lozano, Dan Powell, and Will Reed, and was engineered by Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Lansford of Wonderly. That's it for The Daily. I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. See you tomorrow.